there's this idea in the scriptures that Christ descended below all things so that he could rise above all things. Taking upon himself the weight and the heaviness of the sins of mankind so that he could empathize with us, so that he could understand darkness to its fullness before he could receive of the Father's fullness and be exalted above all things and receive his throne. I've often thought about that because in all of our lives we experience lots and lots of deep, very personal trials that come and go in our lives. And I especially think as, kind of like coming of age, when you're growing up, people in their early 20s, maybe late 20s, figuring out who they want to be and starting to understand their purpose. That it's almost like this hero's journey. The idea of the hero's journey is that you start in innocence, you start to journey into the unknown, and there's a point where you pass through the unknown, but then as you go further and further down, you reach the pit, the depth. This is the point where the hero is either overcome or he overcomes. And in all of the great stories that we love, when they reach the pit, the ones that triumph and that overcome, eventually, they learn from the pit, they overcome darkness, and then they journey back into the known and they return where they began with new knowledge, new insight, new glory. And so it's no coincidence that in, the archetype, the truth of mortality, that we are fallen beings, is that we, in a sense, as humans, are going through the unknown. In my faith, we believe that we began, before this life, we lived with God. We lived in innocence with God. In the Bible, the story of Adam and Eve is that they began in the garden, and through their own will and choice, they chose to partake of the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. This new knowledge banished them from the garden of innocence. In a sense, once you understand good and evil, you're no longer innocent. You are thrust into the world of reality, of good and evil, to contend with it and to learn to choose good. And in my particular faith, we believe that through sacrifice and through covenants and through opposition, Adam and Eve were able to return to the presence of the Father, in the same way that the hero in the hero's journey returns home after having journeyed through the unknown, having suffered through the pit. This is why the story of Jesus Christ is the ultimate archetype. It's the ultimate framework for our lives. And for us, it's iterative because we're not only going to have one trial in our life. There's going to be multiple times where we're journeying through the unknown, where we're facing a monster. Jordan Peterson talks about how the greatest treasure in our lives is always guarded by a dragon. Talking about ancient story, how the greatest treasure is guarded by the dragon. Well, usually the things that are most precious and pure to us in our lives come after trial. There is no witness, there is no reward until after we experience a trial in our faith. That's exactly why we were sent here to earth. I believe that is our purpose on earth. It's our collective mission to contend with good and evil, to be thrust into mortality, a fallen world, an environment where both good and evil prevails and exists, and to learn to choose good, because there would be no point in us returning back to the presence of God. There'd be no point in us going to heaven if we didn't become something or learn something new. Because otherwise, if God's whole plan was only to have us come back, He would never have sent us here in the first place. So that is precisely the reason why the world can be so dark and why we have such personal trials. It's because we become something through them. It's because the act of overcoming is a type of Christ. It's a godly story. And in order to live with God after having fallen, we need to begin to embody similar attributes as him. Choosing worthiness, choosing goodness, choosing virtue, holiness, in spite of opposition, in spite of evil. And so, your life is not just to live a perfect, flawless, naive, and safeguarded life. It is to contend with reality. It is to contend with evil. It is to triumph. It is to wield the sword of justice in defense of truth and virtue, and to stand for something noble and good. The life of a disciple of Jesus Christ, or just a God-fearing hero archetype, is to do that. It is to journey into the unknown. It is to contend with evil and overcome just as Christ did. And as we do that, and as we really understand and embody that archetype, especially in 2026, in this really messed up world that we live in, I believe that we can inspire more souls to rise above their current state, their addictions, their vain ambitions, their vanities, and actually live a life worth living, a life of meaning, a life of purpose and service towards a higher good.